Aloha! Today we're going to be talking about using watercolor pencils in our nature journaling practice. I like using watercolor pencils because they give you quite a few options of how to mix colors and add detail. So the brand I'm going to use today is Pentel. They're just a good price point to begin with and pretty good quality if you ask me. And I'm going to be using a water brush. I have another video about these. And the important thing is you do need some sort of journal that uses either mixed media paper or watercolor paper. If you use just thin drawing paper, it's going to just absorb all of the water, and it's just you're not going to be able to mix in any way that's very satisfying. You can still use watercolor pencils on regular paper, but you just can't really do the water part of that. And so then you're just kind of using more expensive pencils, but they also just still work like that, even dry. So let's get going. Okay, so you can see here that I already have the date at the top of my page. That's so that I can remember when I did this. I also have just a rag right here to wash, to clean my brush off on. I forgot to mention that earlier. You can also just use a paper towel, or you can use the cuff of a old sock that you've cut off. This one's been well loved, you can tell, but today I'm just going to use this rag. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of my colored pencils and I'm going to draw a square. A lot of people kind of feel like, oh, I have to start by using a pencil to draw something, and you really don't. You can actually just go straight to your watercolor pencils or just regular colored pencils. And the square doesn't have to be perfect. As I'm tracing over it, I'm kind of adjusting the lines, making it a little bit straighter, and I'm giving it a nice thick outline. You're going to see why in just a second here. So now I'm going to uncap my water brush. I'm going to squeeze it just a little bit onto my rag just to get it to wake up and to make sure that I didn't have anything too dirty from the previous time that I used it. And then I'm going to just kind of squeeze just a little bit if I need to get the water going and start to pull this color in order to color in my square here. So this is a nice technique that you can use to just have really subtle color on something that you've drawn. You can go out into the field, draw what you see using the colors that you see. Just go straight to the watercolor pencils, and then come in and just give it a little bit of a wash to give it some color and bring that color in. And now I'm going to clean off my brush. So that's one way that you can add a color, is just do the outline and color it in. Another way is, I'm going to try another color, is you can just do this really light outline. Can you still see that? Yeah. And I'm going to color it in lightly. So you can color it in lightly using a couple different methods. So if you just kind of draw all your lines in the same direction lightly, that's an option. You can color it in by using scribble lines. This is my favorite method actually, because you don't have to be quite so careful. You're still trying to do it really lightly on there because we're just going for a light wash. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a bit. But when I get to the edges, when I do this kind of scribble fill in, that I follow that edge because I don't want that scribble to go outside of whatever shape it is that I'm drawing. So this is just like a quick and easy way to fill in a shape really quickly. Another way that you can do this is to use the side of your pencil. So you're going to switch your grip like this and match the angle. The difficulty with this one is just control. It's easy to go outside the lines a whole lot, which may or may not matter depending on what you're doing. But yeah, that's kind of the tricky part about that. But you can get a nice smooth color doing it on the side like that. Now I'm going to come in and we're going to just kind of compare these techniques. So you see how those lines, because I did them pretty lightly, pretty much disappear. And I'm gonna just turn my water brush as I'm going around those edges and make sure I activate those edges as well. So it's a pretty smooth wash. Let's see how this one goes. This one was a little bit darker. I added a little bit more pigment, more of that color down onto the page as part of that process. And see, I'm kind of turning this brush to get. So now I have a little bit more color on here, and yeah, but see all of those scribbly bits, they just kind of blend in and disappear. Now I've got quite a bit of color on my brush right now, so I'm going to just clean it off real quick before I go to the final one. And then this one is probably going to be the smoothest, the coloring on the side. So those are some different ways to color in your shapes if you want a little bit more color or you don't want that hard edge. Now let's see if we color it in really dark. So I'm going to use that scribble technique because that's the easiest way to get a lot of color down. So let's say I have a really blue sky day, just this really rich blue, and I want to capture that in my journal. So when I'm outside, I'm looking up at the sky and I'm coloring it in. Coloring in so strong, my camera's shaking. All right, let's make sure I get it all the way to the edge. I don't have any little white spots. And now I'm going to color it in. Oh, so fun. I love that rich color. But now there's quite a bit of color on my brush, and I actually have so much color that it's moving around, and you can actually see kind of different puddles of color where it's lighter in some areas and darker in some areas. So this is what happens when you put down a lot of color with watercolor pencils or with watercolor in general. You can you start to see that variation in tone. Just to show you how much color I have, I can actually make a whole other square. So you can also do this as a way of swatching, of testing out your colors, and then using it in a different area. So I'm gonna have a whole nother square. What's fun though is if you have it really dark like this, what you can do is you can also pull off color from a certain part of it on purpose and get back down to that white part. So now I'm starting to get a little cloud on here actually. I don't know if there's too much glare for you to see that, but you'll see that kind of as it dries. And if I really want to emphasize this, I can come in and I can take, I'm actually going to take a tissue paper, I have a tissue over here, and just kind of blot it. And now I have contrast between that dark blue sky and that white, so you can see my little cloud right there. And I'm actually going to come in and add a little bit of shape around it, so you can see my little cloud. And since I'm doing this while it's still wet, it's blending and it's not quite so sharp as it would be. And I'm going to just blend it some more. You have to kind of be careful with messing around with it too much, because you could make a hole in your paper or start to lift off the fibers on the paper if you're not using really high quality watercolor paper. So, you know, when you hear about people using really expensive watercolor paper, it's because they want to do, techniques like this. And the final example I'm going to share is what if you do want to see some texture left over, right? So if sometimes when you're journaling about something and it has this really neat texture, and you still want to see that, but you don't want to see, so maybe it's got all these lines, but I don't want to see all that white underneath. I can just do, let's make sure my brush is clean after all that blue. I'm just going to do a quick wash, and I'm going to just go over it just one time. I'm not going to mess around with it too much, because if I mess around with it too much, that's going to start to blend together. The other thing I want to say about this is why when we were filling it in, I was doing it lightly, is if when you are filling it in and you don't want texture, this can happen accidentally with watercolor pencils, and this can be really frustrating. So using one of these, the scribble technique, the side technique, or just doing it really, really lightly is a way to avoid, or just filling in every single little spot is a way to avoid seeing those lines if you don't want them. All right. Now I'm gonna see if some of these are dry. Okay, cool. So this brown one is dry. So I want to show what else. The reason I also really like watercolor pencils is if you're doing this in watercolor, and let's say this is the little seed that you wanted to nature journal, and it's got all of these patterns on top of it. It's pretty hard to draw little tiny details like that with watercolor when you're just starting out, but it's pretty easy to just draw them rather than paint them. So I can just use this now that this is dry. See, I touched it, make sure it's dry. And then I can come in and I can draw in some of this pattern on here and just use this watercolor pencil as just a regular colored pencil and start to fill in some of this detail, right? And I'm just trying to create an impression here of just how fun all of this is and how kind of organic and natural it is. I love looking at patterns. So this is also nice because you can do this to look at a pattern on something you really like, because without having to worry about the shape and making sure you match all the shape, and just focusing on that pattern and having the color that's behind it, you draw that on first and have that as the wash, and then add the detail on top. Now I'm going to show the method of coloring in a monarch butterfly wing. I'm starting with some orange, but I quickly noticed, it's not quite the right color that I'm seeing. So I'm going to mix colors. I'm layering on more color, starting really light and just adding different layers of color, using that side of my pencil technique so I don't get streaking. Then I'm adding the water before I add the black, because if I add the black before I blend the orange and yellows and browns together, it'll just muddy those light, bright colors. And then there's one little part where I had too much color, and I just used a paper towel or a tissue to blot that up. Then while I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm just adding some notes because there was a shape that I didn't quite capture correctly with the watercolor brushes, and instead of worrying about it too much, I'm just doing kind of a zoom in to show how it really looks. Then the final step is to come over on top of that dried light colors with my black. You're going to notice that I don't use a white colored pencil. I just leave the paper white and drawing around those white parts. And I'm just going to leave this pencil dry because there's too many details, and adding water might just muddy it.